So Florida had very unusual hurricane season in 2004. We were hit with 4 major hurricanes in 6 weeks, and that we started immediately looking at, how can we generate enterprise investigative stories off of this. And we focused in on, as I would recommend to anybody looking at these sort of things, follow the relief money. There are just hundreds of millions that all of a sudden become available, and what we found here was we never expected to, and that was incredible waste and fraud within the FEMA disaster assistance.
And if you look at these storms, really the 2 worst ones were the ones on the right side of the screen. They were Francis and Jean, that came pretty close to each other right in Palm Beach County. And after this, Francis and Charlie, Charlie's over on the left there, had come through, we started looking at who was applying for FEMA money and who was getting it. And it turns out a lot of people in Miami were getting money, and way far away from the path of any of the storms.
You can see from this map how far away Miami is from the line in red, which was Hurricane Francis, and that's the one that thousands of people started applying for damage claims out of Miami, even though they were 100 miles away from the storm and didn't have any hurricane conditions.
This was the first story, wasn't it, Sally? It was the first big story?
It was.
Yeah.
And John, you should talk about about these maps and what we found.
Okay. All right. This is the first big story we did about the money and that was coming out. What we did was we wanted to look at 2 different things, really, or 3 different things: the rainfall, the wind speed, and the amount of money that was going to different households. And if you scroll down a little bit on this page, you can see the maps that we did. The money, which is over on the right in the red and the pink there, that was done using FEMA data that we got. And basically, this is just simply, at this point, done by county. That was our earliest data, how much money was going to each county from FEMA for disaster assistance to individuals, homeowners, renters. And that is in contrast with the 2 other maps, which the one on the far left there is the maximum wind speeds in each area, and you can see where Palm Beach County got clobbered. But you can't see very much in Miami-Dade. Maximum winds, 50 miles an hour winds. Dade probably had much more than that with Hurricane Sandy that went through and didn't do much damage at all either. And then then in the middle is the map, is the amount of rainfall that came in, and that was only 6 inches of rain, which again isn't that much here. It's a good storm, but it's not going to stop everything.
Okay, next slide.
And this was done by looking at a combination of the FEMA money going in and data from the Hurricane Center or NOAA. So this jumps way ahead to our project that we published. When was that, Sally? September?
Well, September, yeah. September.
Okay.
So this is almost a year after the hurricane in Florida. So basically, we found the same patterns of fraud had been occurring in disasters all over the country. We looked at, we had developed sources that were familiar with the system, FEMA inspectors, and they were guiding us to particular parts of the country that were prone for, that they knew were high fraud areas. And then we looked at disasters that had occurred in those cities and looked at where the money went, again through extensive FOIA requests from FEMA, and then compared where the money went to what actually occurred, where the damage was. And what we found was in the Los Angeles area, there were wildfires that burned, and yet more than $5 million went to people who lived over 25 miles from the wildfires. We found a similar thing with the tornado in Miami-Dade County, people collecting money up to 37 miles from where the tornado struck. Detroit was a big-scale disaster response, over $168 million for a storm that the mayor and others barely even remembered. caused some minor basement flooding, and that was it. Similar with Baton Rouge with a hurricane that barely touched the city, and in Cleveland with flash floods that weren't even anywhere near where the money was going.
The one in Detroit was interesting because another reporter was working on that story, and the mayor thought he was lying or had the wrong city. He said, "You're crazy. We didn't get $168 million." And yes, they did. Yeah, this is a map made with ArcView. You could use, it's kind of an expensive program. You could use QGIS now, which is free. But this is zip codes in the Los Angeles areas. These were wildfires in 2003 in the fall. The hillsides got very dry outside the city, and the fires started from, I believe, lightning. And the red areas you can see is where the fires occurred. The green areas, the yellow areas are where some money went, and the green areas are where quite a bit of money went. And you can see downtown Los Angeles right there, sort of in the middle of the map. And the blue area, if you move your cursor over there, the blue outlined area is, that's Watts. We'd picked out Watts. And so we could see money just going to this area that was miles and miles away from the wildfire. And the only thing that people could remember was ash and some ash coming down like snowflakes, and that's about it. But Sally, you can address that because you went there.
Yes, I actually went to Watts and tried to find people who had applied for FEMA money and just kind of wandered around. We had data by zip code, so we knew that those areas collected a lot of money, but of course we didn't have names, so we didn't know specifically who. And we just walked around asking people, you know, do you remember the wildfires? And most people didn't remember the wildfires, but as soon as you said FEMA, people said, oh yeah, FEMA, that's free money. And they described how, you know, they had clothes that had smoky smells to them from the smoke that was in the air, but nobody really obviously sustained any fire damage, and yet they collected a lot of money, millions of dollars, being that far away from the fires.
It was interesting to every city we went to, that reaction about FEMA and the free money that happened about everywhere. And you'd mention FEMA and their eyes would light up because it was like people who won money at the racetrack once. Yeah, oh, FEMA, yeah, we remember them. Briefly, from a data point of view, this was an easy one to do. Sally had the idea of when we got this data, say how many funerals did they pay for, and that took me 10 or 20 minutes to do, and just get the numbers. And I had a number of funerals, and Sally can take it on from there.
The interesting thing we found about, and the parallels here with Sandy are striking. The storms that hit Florida, they were all in a short span of time in 2004, within weeks of the presidential election. Almost identical circumstances to what we're seeing now. One of the things we quickly realized was this can be a political tool. It certainly was in Florida, a key state, back in 2004, and it could be again with Sandy. We found this story as an example of how eager the federal government was to hand out money and be perceived as sort of the knight in shining armor to, you know, potential voters. They were persuading people to coroners to count deaths that had nothing to do with the storms as storm related, and encouraging people to apply for funeral benefits, again, even though the deaths had nothing to do with the hurricanes. And that's how they ended up paying for 315 deaths in Florida, even though there were only 123 actual fatalities that were officially recorded. But that's a key point, I think, that people need to keep in mind. How a lot of this happened in Florida, you could see again with Sandy, because you had the governor of our state, Jeb Bush at the time, requesting disaster declarations before the storm hit, and he got them from his brother. So there were counties in Florida that were declared a disaster area, even though once the storm hit, they really weren't, they didn't sustain much damage. That happened again with Sandy, where you see disaster declarations before the storm came ashore. So the potential for this sort of thing is high again, because you could theoretically have parts of states that really are not that affected by Sandy, yet they're eligible for disaster aid, and they could start applying, and you could start seeing a lot of money going to areas that just aren't that highly impacted. This is an example of the level of detail you can get with data requests for individual assistance claims from FEMA. What we found is they were giving money based on what taking people's word for it, saying they lost washers and dryers, televisions, baby strollers, you name it. And FEMA had a set amount of money that they awarded based solely, mostly on the word of the applicant, saying that they had something, it was working before, and then they either lost it or it was damaged or destroyed in the storm. And the amount of, televisions and appliances and whatnot that were being reimbursed to people in areas outside the storm was huge. FEMA was also overpaying. That they were giving a standard amount of money for each item that was well above what you could buy it for in stores, and we went to actually shopping with what you could buy with FEMA's assistance.
And the reason that the money was so high, we know how electronics are. The price is always coming down, and they had set the price that they would pay for a damaged computer, years before, and you could buy a much better computer than what you lost if you claimed it was destroyed. And we heard a story in Baton Rouge where they had one TV set that a bunch of people were passing around. As the inspector came around, they'd move the TV set from one house to another. It was broken.
Okay. One thing I think all reporters should keep in mind covering Sandy, we saw this after Katrina, where the FEMA authorized emergency payments to anyone who was displaced by the storm. You could get $2,000. They waived a lot of their normal checks and balances and just basically cut checks or debit cards to people so they could, theoretically get assistance and pay for medicines and whatnot quickly and not have to wait for the claims process. But of course, there was all kinds of fraud with that. We found parishes in Louisiana that had collected more money than there were households. And I think the same potential exists here with Sandy. So close to the election, it could be another example where, to try to win maybe political favor, you might see some more emergency payments, and those are just rife with fraud. One of the things reporters can look at is who is actually safeguarding the money, who is FEMA relying on to approve claims, and actually some of the disaster relief agencies like the Red Cross, what are their checks and balances. We looked at the contracted inspectors that FEMA was sending into homes in Florida that were signing off on these bogus claims. And we found a lot of them were convicted felons. We found one that was wanted here in Florida and yet had been hired to go into people's homes. And so there can be a lot of stories, good stories about, how the government is handing this money out, and who do they have watching out and safeguarding against fraud.
Now, refresh my memory, Sally, before on this. These were generators that they weren't restricted to the poor, right?
Right. This is something that wasn't needs-based. So in a lot of the other assistance that was going out, if you had private insurance, you weren't eligible for FEMA assistance. This didn't have any income requirements or any means. It wasn't means tested. So if you had purchased a generator for one of these hurricanes, you could apply for reimbursement from FEMA. And what we found were, people who certainly didn't necessarily need reimbursement, a surgeon, a lawyer, various people who just, not that they did anything wrong, but a lot of people went out and bought generators and submitted the receipts to FEMA. We even found FEMA paying more, reimbursing someone more than he actually paid for the generator.
And people, like Sally said, we found people that were by no means in need of money to pay for a generator. If they had two fancy cars in the garage and were a surgeon or a lawyer, they didn't need it. But if I remember right, they were a little surprised they could get the money themselves, but they were also saying, what the heck? If I'm entitled to it, I'm going to take it.
It's important to get those FOIA requests filed early with FEMA. They're going to be inundated with requests now, and it'll help a lot if you are very specific about what you're looking for. What we based our investigation on were claims for individual assistance. There's also public assistance that goes to government entities for things like debris removal, rebuilding infrastructure. Those are also good to get. What you typically see happening first are these individual assistance claims. And we ask, you can get it by zip code. You can get individual claims, but not names or addresses, down to the level of zip code. And this is an example of what we requested for one of the disasters, and you can get very detailed information about each claim that was filed and what was paid by zip code, and that can give you great detailed information about where the money's going and for what.
And Sally, you can get addresses now, right? That's what our court case was about?
Yeah, that's right, right. You
I
can
put that
get,
there at the top.
yeah, in our request, FEMA was denying addresses, but we sued and ultimately won after we had finished our investigation, so it should now be possible. They should be providing addresses as well.
And talk about a little bit about the expedited request. If you slip down a little bit farther, I think. Look at this.
Right, there it is.
There it is, right there in the middle.
Right. It helps. It's not a guarantee that you'll be successful, but it certainly helps to request that they expedite processing of your request. And here's some sample language on what we use to basically say that this is in the public interest and should be released quickly. I haven't had any more very recent experience in requesting this data from FEMA, so I don't know how they're treating these requests now. But I would put that in my very first request that you want it expedited. We were granted expedited processing, and most of the requests that we made were pretty much fulfilled within sometimes as little as 3 weeks. I think the longest we may have waited was about 6 weeks. Is that right, John?
Yeah, that sounds about right. And I have heard, I did talk to a reporter with USA Today who was working on, I think the 9/11 disaster, was trying to get FEMA records, and he was saying that it was he'd been waiting a few months, so they might not be as good as they used to be. Who knows? I think that's it, right?
Okay. Yeah, I think it is.
Jamie, there's one thing that, from the data point of view, that I don't know where you could squeeze this in, but here's the way we did this. When we had more than 20 disasters that we looked at, but we only really focused on the 4 or 5, those cities that we went to. And the reason we went to those is because I was trying to figure out where the good picking grounds were for us to go as reporters. And what I needed to find was areas where a storm hit one place, or a disaster of some sort, fire, and then miles away there was money going. So I had to have the two separated. That seems to me like that's going to be difficult with Sandy, because Sandy took out such of a wide area. I don't know the way around that necessarily, but I think if I were up there, I would be getting the FEMA data no matter what to see what they can find.
I think it's a good idea for anybody to get the FEMA data. In this disaster, you have so many states that have already been declared disaster areas. And even though the damage is going to be widespread, within each state, some parts are going to be a lot more affected than others. So get the data, look at where the FEMA money is going. I think there's a high chance you will see parts of the state that are not that impacted getting money.